Welcome to the DEC4 podcast. You can access episodes, companion articles, research notes and links, as well as information about our contributors and supporters at dec4podcast.com. Hope you enjoy the program. Hello and thank you for listening. The very first time Gary Wells joined us back in 2021, we talked about the 1970 MGM concert documentary Elvis, That's the Way It Is, which we present for this episode as an omnibus edit. Gary's website, soulrideblog.com, has a huge international audience, and his work on mid-century music, movies and culture is appreciated for its accuracy and sincerity, not only by his readers, but by people close to the subjects he writes about and by researchers seeking a trusted source. And we're very lucky to have Gary as our leading contributor. So here Gary takes us back to the summer of 1970. Elvis is riding a wave of renewed commercial and artistic success. He's once again making some great music, topping the charts, and is already the #1 live act in Las Vegas. From a number of different perspectives, Elvis, That's the Way It Is documents the lead up to Elvis's third season at the International Hotel and also takes us into the showroom and backstage for the first few performances. The director, two-time Oscar winner Denis Sanders, said that what we're trying to do is capture Elvis the entertainer from the point of view of the fans, the hotel, the city and the audience. Elvis, That's the Way It Is a fascinating, eccentric time capsule of Elvis's career and of a disappearing Hollywood and a new Las Vegas business model which had undergone a seismic shift transitioning from organised crime to corporate control. We discuss some of the fascinating people that made this unique era what it was and discover the artists and crew that created a remarkable cinematic moment in time. For this edit, we've also added some supplementary points we made later on, including more on Colonel Parker's influence on the film's final edit and a comparison between That's the Way It Is and Elvis on Tour in terms of how the fans were represented. And we've also included part of a later conversation on the corporatisation of Las Vegas in the years leading up to Elvis's residency at the International Hotel. We've also updated the webpage for our original episodes to accommodate this new edit, and we do hope you enjoy it. Where was Elvis in terms of his career in the summer of 1970? What were the key events that had got him to this point?
Well, it's interesting you talk about the third season. I guess we shouldn't start in 70, but this is interesting that he had already been in Las Vegas for a while by the time the cameras rolled here at MGM. But of course, burst on the scene in 56. And of course, the next step for a lot of these guys is Hollywood, and made some great films in the late 50s, and then, of course, the Army. And it's funny, all these things could rate a podcast of their own, but we'll keep moving. Of course, the Hollywood films became ridiculous. I mean, again, we could talk about that too. Wonderfully ridiculous, I think. But there definitely became he bottomed out in Hollywood. And I like to credit Jerry Reed with a couple of his tunes that Elvis recorded in the mid to late 60s that refreshed him a little bit. And then, of course, Chips Moman at American Sound in 69. Hooked up with Felton Jarvis, who became his producer. The 68 comeback, of course, reintroduced him to the crowds. And then once all of this added up to him being done with Hollywood, as you know. But, of course, there's a lot that could be said, too, about the Colonel, Parker, and Elvis of thinking that perhaps, there was other arenas to try and conquer. Hollywood, I guess you could say, had been conquered, but that was wrung right out to nothing. So, and it's often said that Elvis was keen to perform live again, to get back to his audience and to engage with an audience. And so the result was, Colonel made it happen. Las Vegas was a place. It's funny, Las Vegas got sort of a stigma afterwards, but at this point it was the place to go for entertainers and for tourists and people to enjoy a good show. He got looking fit and healthy and looked fantastic because, he was going to be seen by a lot of people every night, couple times a night. And so we end up 1970, that's the place to go. And I think it's obviously a legit choice at the time. Barbra Streisand had just been there. Big names, Sinatra, Sammy Davis, Wayne Newton. It was the big place to go. So Elvis to have gone there made perfect sense. He looked great. He had some great songs in his locker and got a great band together. and hit the desert.
So his career is definitely in its ascendancy. Not so for Hollywood at that point, was it? There were quite a few issues, particularly with MGM, that was the studio that made Elvis, That's the Way It Is, but that had a very difficult decade throughout the 60s. By 1970, I think it's fair to say the old studio system was in disarray. Independent filmmakers were dominating. MGM at that point, rather conveniently in the context of the film, was owned by the same mogul that owned the International Hotel, Kirk Kerkorian. He had placed in charge of MGM James Aubrey, the Smiling Cobra, who was quite a character from what you read.
Yes, for sure. That was a new name for me, but I looked him up, and quite a guy, almost like the big guy that you bring in to fix things up, and he wasn't there for very long, but he was ruthless.
But James Aubrey actually became quite notorious in Hollywood circles for selling off the MGM back lot and also auctioning many of the props from the classic films. This is from filmreference.com. The struggles of the decade. These struggles culminated in 1969, a year in which MGM posted its biggest ever loss, $35 million, and was taken over by Las Vegas mega developer Kirk Kerkorian. Now here's where it specifies how MGM's predicament was a little different. Though Paramount, Warner Brothers and United Artists were acquisition targets as well, they were bought by diversified conglomerates which allowed them to continue operations despite the industry-wide recession. Kerkorian, conversely, was a financier and real estate tycoon who was primarily interested in MGM for its brand name and for the value of its library, and had no inclination to underwrite its failing movie production and distribution operation.
Yeah, that is interesting. As opposed to huge business operations behind the studio, it was kind of one guy, and it was just part of his portfolio, wheeling and dealing. So things are obviously going to be different there. Yeah, that's interesting.
At the so during this period in 1970, MGM was still making some films. Interestingly, one of the films to come out 2 days before Elvis, That's the Way It Is, was Ryan's Daughter, the David Lean epic, and even though that was a critical disaster at the time and traumatised David Lean so much he didn't make another film for 14 years, it actually did make some money. So it wasn't all bad news. They had some reasonable profile films coming out, even though it was certainly a long way from the one movie per week that they were releasing in the golden era of the studio system. So to move on and actually get to the film, there's some very interesting people actually behind the film that you don't really realise are there until you really go and look for them. So obviously we'll get to Denis Sanders in some detail, the director. Is there anyone in particular behind the scenes that attracted your attention?
You know what? Well, yeah, Sanders did, but I was fascinated. Lucien Ballard, the director of photography, whose name shows up, all through Hollywood history. I thought that was fascinating. Maybe mostly because such a craftsman, and I've never really thought of That's the Way It Is, essentially a documentary, essentially a concert film, as even having a director of photography, as even giving me interesting images and whatnot. But to have used such a heavy hitter for that indicates that there was an intent, at least, to make a pretty good film. So that interested me as well, that Ballard was on hand. You think that perhaps a director of photography for a documentary, maybe wouldn't even be a thing. The director has a vision and he grabs the camera and shoots what he wants. But that I thought was interesting. Yes,
and another interesting gentleman that doesn't actually get a screen credit is Herbert F. Solow. Now, he passed away actually only last year at the age of 89. He has rather an interesting pedigree as well. Now, at the time of Elvis, That's the Way It Is, he was vice president in charge of motion picture and television production for the MGM UK and US operations. And before working at MGM, he worked at Desolue for Lucille Ball, and he successfully pitched Star Trek to NBC. In fact, George Takei on Twitter, when Herbert Solow died last year, said Herbert F. Solow was the great man responsible for getting Star Trek its first legs at Desolue. Without him, there would be no Starfleet, no Spock, With his passing, I ask that we all honour this often unsung hero.
Yes, you mentioned his name to me. I looked him up, and yeah, the whole Star Trek thing, and I think that's where I maybe had seen the name on the credits of Star Trek. And so Star Trek is a whole other thing, too. I mean, the whole universe, no pun intended, that is sprung up over Star Trek. I mean, and again, to have that guy working on this film, I think it shows a little bit of the intent. I mean, that's a fairly heavy hitter. I don't know if they really knew it at the time. What Star Trek had just gone off the air, I think, 69. You know, that's a pretty big name too. You're right. That's worth noting.
Okay, so now obviously the key person is Denis Sanders, and possibly an unlikely director for an Elvis movie. He was a 2-time Oscar winner for a short subject and documentary. And in fact, he, in an interview, one of the research sources that we'll allude to quite a bit is an article by Jerry Hopkins in Rolling Stone from September of 1970. And Denis Sanders actually said he'd never met Colonel Parker, never met Elvis before being called to do Elvis, That's the Way It Is. The only contact, in fact, he'd ever had with MGM was that he was brought in to work on The Subterraneans and had been thrown off the lot, literally fired and thrown off the lot because they were so unhappy with his work. But he obviously had a pretty remarkable career outside of making Elvis, That's the Way It Is. Was a documentary maker, had directed television, and went on to be a film academic.
Yeah, what's fascinating about him for me is he is yet another player. I think of Steve Binder, who made the 68 comeback special. These innovative men who had obviously a talent and a vision seem to meet up with Elvis at pivotal times. They make really good product. I mean, the 68 comeback special and That's the Way It Is are representative of two of the three high points of Elvis's whole career. But you often read, too, you wonder if Colonel thought, well, this guy, not that I don't know what kind of future relationship Presley and Sanders could have had, but they just meet up for this one moment and then they're gone. And Sanders almost goes off into nothingness. I was fascinated to learn that he had made a film version of Norman Mailer's The Naked and the Dead with his brother. He worked with his brother. And I noticed the cast list for Naked and the Dead: Richard Jekyll, L.Q. Jones, and William Campbell, who had all made films with Elvis. Again, here's another major player working on an Elvis film. I mean, an Oscar winner. I mean, that is quite a coup of sorts that Sanders was interested, and they got him to come in. His music cred, maybe, I read that he would go on to make Soul to Soul, a documentary of a concert in Ghana. I think it was 1974, featuring the likes of Wilson Pickett and Santana and others. And I couldn't resist. He also made Invasion of the Bee Girls.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Which may be as good as it sounds, which could be, really bad, or, hey, really wonderful. Yeah. Who knows?
Early in his career in 1962, he actually directed the film debut of Robert Redford, which is just an interesting aside.
Yes, in a war, war film, wasn't it?
Yes, War Hunt, it was called. Also starring John Saxon, and won the British Film Academy Award. So, his credentials as a filmmaker were pretty impressive. He passed away, by the way, in 1987, but he had a particular vision for the film. And once again, I'm going to refer to Jerry Hopkins' article in Rolling Stone. What we're trying to do, Denis Sanders said, is capture Elvis the entertainer from the point of view of the fans, the hotel, the city, and the audience. It was the first documentary. Elvis, That's the Way It Is was the first documentary apparently to be made in Panavision, and the first to be budgeted at over $1 million. And Denis Sanders actually predicted that the film was going to make a fortune. I'm not sure that it did. I think it did okay, but I don't think it was a blockbuster. But he also was quite keen to point out that it was going to change things for the documentary movement as well. So I'm wondering if there might be a direct line, for instance, from Elvis, That's the Way It Is to The Last Waltz.
Yeah, I think you could say that. I think that perhaps Woodstock, a documentary film that is well received, I think that was relatively new at the time. And with the changes in society and music, having depictions on screen of the new generation or the new kids that are out there and what they're doing, I think there became a market for that. I got to think that a Presley movie is a little bit outside of that because, nothing was less hippie than Elvis Presley, but certainly after the success of something like this and later Elvis on tour, the concert movie definitely became viable. And with a group of guys like the band for a kickoff, I think having a concert movie be on the table at all probably was because they knew it had gone before and it had been successful. So I think it's easy to trace back the concert film to That's the Way It Is, because it was a straight up feature film and it was a documentary and it depicted performance on stage. So that became a thing. That's a thing that we can do now. You get a charismatic performer or group of performers, and the backstage stuff is thrilling for the fans. Any sort of candid talk, and then it's a performance. Not everybody can see them in concert, but your local neighborhood theater shows it. You go and see it, and so the band certainly, I would have thought, would have had that in their minds because of this film. That's a good point.
Okay, so just before we get into the film itself, just a couple of other names. Dale Hutchinson was unit production manager, assistant director on Speedway, Stay Away Joe, and Beach Blanket Bingo, yes, amongst 17 other credits. American
International Pictures. That's my jam. I love that place. So if he worked there, I give him points for that. Yep.
Yep. Edited by Henry Berman, brother of Pandro S. Berman. Associate editor George Folsey Jr., who later edited The Blues Brothers and also produced The Three Amigos and Trading Places, son of cinematographer George Folsey.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention was Henry Berman, the editor. I noticed he won an Oscar for editing the film Grand Prix. Now, my first thought was, I'm thinking about Le Mans with Steve McQueen and Winning with Paul Newman, and these race car movies are hard for non-fans to really enjoy unless they're edited well. The pacing of the race, what the different maneuverings of the cars and the drivers mean, I think is all in the hands of the editor. So it's no joke having edited Grand Prix, and that's another fairly big name, I would think, working on this film. That's a guy that knows how to cut a film. So again, there's a pretty good team assembled here.
We've had a bit of a talk about who's behind the cameras. As we get to the actual film, the initial footage behind the opening credits is from Phoenix, Arizona on September 9th at Veterans Memorial Coliseum. That was Elvis' first stadium tour of the 70s, although earlier that year he had done a series of shows at the Houston Rodeo. And that apparently was the last day of principal photography. So from the opening credits, we then go straight to band rehearsals at MGM. And one thing I did want to ask in the context of what we were talking about, The Last Waltz, we take it for granted now, CD box sets, and on YouTube we can watch the Beach Boys and everybody making mistakes and recording. In 1970, was it something quite new and innovative to actually get into the creative process and see the band working up these songs and having fun and, making mistakes as they try and bring it all together?
It really made me, my brain was racking, thinking, yes, we are so used to the mega box set with every, particularly Presley's releases on the FTD label, every moment, almost every second, virtually every second of what it took to record that song, to record that album. And like you say, the creative process, it is riveting. But for so long, we've had that we're used to it. And yes, I'm amazed at the clips that show up on YouTube. You think, how has somebody got this footage? But making a film, making a record, making an album has become, that's part of an artist's catalog. There must be a box set somewhere, or there's a bonus track on the CD, or there's scores of videos on YouTube. It really made me try to look at this from a 1970 perspective. I think that was unheard of. I think seeing a person rehearse ahead of a live engagement or for making of a record, we had never seen that, I don't think, in 1970. And it's not just anybody either. I mean, this is Elvis Presley working to see him candidly, a man that was so well guarded publicly, a man that didn't sit for interviews all the time like Sinatra and others did, to see him in a candid setting. I mean, I rewatched the film recently. It is fascinating to see, as candid as he could have been, knowing full well that a film was being shot. It is still a peek behind the curtain, and you got to think in 1970 that was a fascinating thing to see. For others who had maybe seen him live or who had bought the records, to see these things being made, I got to think that was fairly groundbreaking and quite remarkable.
So we had some pretty stellar talent in the room there with him. James Burton, of course, on lead guitar. John Wilkinson on rhythm. John Wilkinson passed away in 2013. Ronnie Tutt on drums. Jerry Sheff, a virtuoso bass player. I mean, it's hard to imagine a better bass player anywhere than Jerry Sheff. Glenn Harden, not only superb piano player, but also the arranger, and would often be the liaison between the group and Joe Gershow in terms of actually writing down some of the arrangements, because obviously with an orchestra you couldn't perhaps wing it like you could with a band, and Glenn Harden had been a very good liaison between those two very different, I guess, styles of working. And of course Charlie Hodge, who passed away in 2006. I think his role has been undervalued. He was more than someone that just handed Elvis's scarves and lyric sheets on stage. He was a vocal coach, a creative collaborator. In fact, he really was the co-producer of the shows, had a lot of input into set list and structure and all of those things. So it's hard to imagine much more talent in one place, really, quite honestly.
It really is. And you have to detach yourself. I mean, you're thinking of the virtuoso guitar players and musicians of the day, guys like Jimi Hendrix or whatever that stand out there and wail. But on a different level and a no less accomplished level, the studio group, the live band, and Presley is not going to get, second-rate players around him. So it's actually taken me a while to really appreciate a guitar player like James Burton. I mean, maybe his style is not readily or easily appreciated, but if you dig in a little bit, the same with Ronnie Tutt, Jerry Sheff. I mean, Morrison Hotel, The Doors, the bass work on that record is unreal. So, and Elvis would let him wail, of course, in the 70s on stage, and his technique is staggering. So, and Glenn's role, you don't think a performer like Presley needs to have anything arranged at all. The guy goes from his gut and he just sings, and we all flip out. But there's got to be guys working behind the scenes. And you talk Charlie and Glenn. Glenn maybe is the more tangible, I mean, there's a smart guy. And there's a guy that could have maybe parked himself in Nashville and worked for everybody and probably made a good living. But working with Presley, of course, has a shine to it. And what he provided, I mean, we benefit so much from his arrangements, from his piano playing, from his work with the orchestra, like you say. So that's a key player. And poor Charlie, I mean, I never forget when Elvis called him a flunky there on stage in the 70s.
Yes, in Aloha.
Wasn't it Aloha?
I think it was edited from the actual broadcast, but it appeared on the subsequent,
So you know what Presley is like, okay? They're all a bunch of buds hanging out.
I think Charlie Hodge was certainly a remarkable... I mean, they're all very talented, but Charlie Hodge was a remarkable, underappreciated talent, I think. We just see also another interesting scene with Elvis and a few of the boys arriving at the MGM studios, and you get a nice wide shot of the studio there. Big sign above one of the sound stages promoting Goodbye Mr. Chips. I actually made a mistake in the research notes. They weren't shooting it. It had actually already been released. It was shot largely on location, but it's interesting that it was their obviously their showpiece that they were advertising on top of the studio, this musical remake with Peter O'Toole. But this is actually one of my favourite bits in the film, when they stop and this studio police officer comes out of the little guard box and looks like he had been there, obviously since the golden years, and you could imagine him on the gate when Elvis first went to MGM, and there's just such a beautiful warm greeting, and there's a handshake, and the security guard slaps Elvis on the back. And I just think that absolutely speaks volumes about Elvis's attitude to everybody that he came in touch with professionally, and I just think that's a really lovely moment.
I agree, and something I think of when Elvis is here in Hollywood. I mean, it's well documented. He was not a Hollywood guy, to say the least. The whole atmosphere of Hollywood was not his jam. And I'm thinking about the security guard, like you say. Who knows if he's maybe been abused in his career by highfalutin stars that come in. But he remembers, like you say, there's one good old boy from the South who served me to death. And it was always a delight to see him. So there's a little bit of a story there, too, in that quick little moment of that handshake. Maybe that security guard went back into that booth, smiled, and took a breath and said, now there's a nice boy. You know what I mean? Who knows? You're right. It's a really good moment.
Now, one rather fascinating part of the film, and much of this, I think, even perhaps all of it was removed when they re-released it, was the fan interviews that were pretty interesting. And I'd just like to read for now, one of the contributors was Ann Moses, who at that time was the editor of Tiger Beat, which was a teen magazine and still is, teen fan magazine. She was also the correspondent for New Musical Express, and she would do her Elvis work for New Musical Express in the UK. And I should mention that she is active on social media. She posts regularly on Facebook, and she has a website, and there is a fascinating article about her time on Elvis, That's the Way It Is, and there will be a link to this and lots of other stuff in the newsletter that will accompany the podcast. But just like to read a little bit from annmoses.com, and this is what Denis Sanders was trying to achieve with the interviewees. When it came time for Denis Sanders to make his documentary film of Elvis, he wanted to include fans in the story. As he told me in a personal interview when I asked him why he wanted to include the fans, he replied, "Because I feel you don't have an entertainer without an audience. I feel they are completely interrelated. Some sense of this effect on his audience is as much a part of the drama as the entertainer himself." Then I asked if he had any idea when he began that the fans would be like the ones he put on film. He was candid. "No, I didn't know anything about Presley fans. I started with 2 girls. They put me in touch with other girls who had been in fan clubs, and then the whole thing snowballed. I didn't have too much time. I had to function as a detective to follow the leads and get a cross-section. I didn't want to have just girls who were 18 years old. I also wanted everything from teeny boppers to old ladies, men, different nationalities, and had to find them." What do you think Denis Sanders was trying to achieve?
Well, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me, because I was really racking my brain. I thought, now, okay, I get it. Show me the fans, and it's part of the story. I get it. And it's fascinating, too, to note that as early as 1970, it was understood by at least one man, Denis Sanders, that the fandom around Elvis Presley is like nothing else in history. To say that they are part of the story is to use the smallest possible terms to explain the thing with Elvis and his fans. So, get a cross-section, get a different, not just the screaming girls, get a cross-section of the different types of fans. And, I tried to understand, was it Cricket, Sue, and Tinkerbell, the cat?
Elvis's Uncle Vester, I think, was the one that introduced us. And he says, Sue, that's Cricket, and Cricket, that's Sue. He had known me for about 10 years. I had gone down there 10 years before I ever met Elvis. And Sue had been there several times. But neither one of us really met him. Well, Sue met him in Hawaii. But I haven't met him until I actually moved there. And Sue and I, right away became friends.
And then Tinkerbell adopted us.
And Elvis.
She's only about 8 months old, but she's a good fan.
Certainly. She loves to listen to Elvis.
We've taken her up to the house, but she hasn't met Elvis yet.
She likes his Vegas album because it's got a lot of action in it.
So, I'm trying to be open-minded and understand Sanders, what he's going for.
He's the Willie Mays of entertainment. He can sing, dance, tell a good story, and do it all in such a way that you can believe it. And that's what I liked about it. That's what I thought was so great. He walked out on stage, and that's all it took for me. I was an Elvis fan immediately. Before, I had heard a lot about him. Said, yeah, sure, nobody is that good. Well, he's that good.
I've got friends that collect every snapshot they can get. They've got hundreds of dollars worth of scrapbooks with just snapshots taken up to the house anywhere they can get them.
He's the original creator of this style. Well, not the original creator, but he blended it and put it together in a way that it stayed. And when he did this, he created something that nobody knew where it was going to stop.
I'd say, in a sense, I love Elvis, but not like I'd love a person that I want to marry. I think it's more of the type of love you'd have for a brother or sister. I love him pretty much like I would a member of the family.
It's hard for me to understand because I never have felt that way about any entertainer, but to each his own.
The guy in the sweater with the glasses maybe should have had his own film. That guy's something else.
The Village Voice reviewed Elvis, That's the Way It Is.
I read that. Yes, I read that.
Across Middle America, Elvis is worshipped with a fervour akin to fundamentalist fanaticism. Elvis, That's the Way It Is about the annual pilgrimage of Middle Americans to their ultimate shrine, Las Vegas, to their very own oracle, Elvis. Like a sociological sharpshooter, director Denis Sanders zeroes in on every conceivable variant of American Gothic, from little old ladies to perhaps the creepiest... I can't read this without laughing, I shouldn't, but the creepiest young man ever to appear on film. You alluded to Sue and Cricket. Now, Sue was the president of the Blue Hawaiians for Elvis fan club and had actually met him in Hawaii. And in fact, Sue and Cricket are mentioned in this Jerry Hopkins article. You know, wherever sort of Elvis goes, there goes Sue and Cricket. But Cricket is quite interesting. She was a lot more than a fan. She was actually a friend of Elvis for around 11 years. And and I'll put a link to this as well, she was actually at Elvis Week in 2011 and is on YouTube with a little clip where she's sort of reminiscing a little bit. She actually used to work for Elvis on and off at the gate, sort of, fan liaison, that sort of thing. So Cricket is a lot more interesting than she was portrayed. I sort of wondered whether or not there was... And we saw this in the 70s with press reviews and even in Jerry Hopkins' article that we'll go into more detail a little later, but there's always just seems to be, I don't know if I'm being a bit oversensitive, but there always seems to be almost this attitude of sneering about Elvis fans, whether it's their southern accent or their appearance or whatever. And I want... Look, I don't think Denis Sanders here was setting anybody up to be embarrassed. I think, he was trying to get to, and certainly demonstrating that Elvis fans were very different. You wouldn't have seen too many of those at Woodstock, I wouldn't have thought. No. It was a very different demographic. So how do you see how they were presented in the end?
I liked the married couple as well. Buddy has a great blue suit with a white tie. He looks great. And they rearranged their wedding to be there for this, and that was a good representation too. In this day and age, we're used to a couple of words on the screen. Like you say, these two girls, Cricket and Sue, aren't just nobody off the street. So if maybe Sanders, and it's common practice now, even just their name on the screen and who they are. And if it's just Joe Blow, then just say that, he's a fan since whenever or whatever. Just, it seems so random. And it does seem like there's nobody is aside from the married couple maybe, as being really, I don't want to say intelligent because people aren't portrayed as dumb, but somebody who is, really intelligent and trying to give an explanation and even self-deprecating in a way, saying he's not the Beatles, he's not this erudite, fancy type performer, but you know what? Right in my soul, he gets me. Nobody really was interviewed and gave that sort of spiel. So if there was a bit of context, interesting to note that even at the time, the Village Voice says that these people are a little bit off the wall. And it's a little bit odd that Sanders would have interviewed them and used those clips in his film. So even at the time, but it is what it is. It's 1970. Looking down through the ages, I mean, it's not surprising that these clips didn't make the 2001 remake of this film, whatever you want to call it. But because it's so of its time and it just doesn't translate well down through the years. But the idea of here's what his fans are like is significant, and it's a good part of the film. I guess we can critique and say, could it have been handled better? Well, I guess so, but I understand what he was going for. I think now, at the time, when I was a kid watching this movie, I snickered at Buddy in the sweater, but now I understand a bit more what he was going for. It makes sense. And it's a pretty good part of the film. I mean, does it come off with the polish? Maybe it could have. No, but it makes sense that he would have done that. So it really was a brain racker to get behind those interviews, what their purpose was and how they translate down through the years.
Actually, one more to mention, the African-American gentleman who is pictured in front of the RCA truck with all the records, his name was Lionel Hudson, and he was a foreman at RCA. During the time he worked there, he became friends with both Elvis and, interestingly, Colonel Parker. Said Colonel Parker had always taken care of him and had been very nice to him.
What makes me a bona fide fan of Elvis, because all through the years how a man can stay on top as good as Elvis, he must have something. And I like Elvis because of his music and the way he presents it, and everything about Elvis that seemed to be in the right place at the time.
He also appears in the showroom, actually. You can see him really having a great time with Patch It Up. But it's an interesting thing about Colonel Parker, because Parker was obviously very nice to Lionel as a warehouseman and or foreman at RCA Records. And yet if you hear some of the interviews from the band, Duke Bardwell, for instance, said, you'd go up to Colonel Parker and say, "Hello, Colonel, how are you?" And he would just ignore you.
Yeah, I wonder about Colonel, if you're a performer, if you have anything going on, you don't have much value to Colonel. He's not interested in that. But I think a more regular Joe, guy that works in the factory, maybe Colonel, being a real simple type guy, could relate better to Joe Worker and talk with him nice. And maybe he did have enough niceness, and that's where it came out, with just the regular guys, working.
Some of the really fascinating stuff for me was actually behind the scenes at the hotel when they're doing the preparations, and all of the effort and the merchandising and the logistics of getting people into the showroom and out of the showroom. The behind-the-scenes stuff I actually find really fascinating. In fact, I found that more fascinating this time when I went back to watch it again.
The exact same thing happened to me. You get so used to a film, you get so next to it, you love it, that's great. But when you go into watching it with a certain goal in mind, you do see different things. And the preparation was fascinating. And what I thought this time was Las Vegas would have loved this film. I mean, it's a great brochure for their playground, the city there, for what goes into a show. And even, it's a documentary in the truest sense, because here's how it's done. The little clips where we see the signs being made, those black signs where the two guys are slapping the paint on there and they make the sign. I mean, where's their documentary? That's riveting. To see the preparation is fascinating. And I noticed distinctly when I watched it recently for this, the juxtaposition between the hotel getting ready and Elvis getting ready, and how they're about to converge when he hits the stage. Fascinating that each was doing their part in the hotel. Lots going on there to get ready.
So the rehearsals move on from Hollywood to Las Vegas, and they start to rehearse with the Imperials and with the Sweet Inspirations, and also with Millie Kirkham, who in those days was singing soprano before Kathy Westmoreland, of course. Now, something that I'm going to be very interested in your opinion about, when Elvis gets together with the Sweet Inspirations, they're talking about Gee Gee Gambill.
His wife's parents were keeping the little boy, and they wouldn't let him take him out of town. So they had one child in California, one back there, and they were traveling back and forth, and it was a little too much for him. So
But it is his child. Can you take his child away from his child?
It's not really his child. It was his wife's child by a previous marriage.
They're talking about Gee Gee Gambill. Elvis is explaining that he had left the entourage for family reasons. And he's talking about Gee Gee's parental arrangements, the fact that, there was child custody issues and all of this sort of stuff. And it sort of struck me, I could sort of see why they did it, because it says that, people in the entertainment business have the same sort of family problems and issues that everybody else does. But given that it was sort of in real time, and the film only came out a few weeks really, or a couple of months after all this was happening, and it's obviously still very new. I mean, we can talk about it now 50 years later and it's not going to hurt anyone, you wouldn't think, but you just wonder, given that was a very intimate, or sort of a conversation about some very intimate matters, I just wonder why that was in.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. Yeah, so, okay, the camera's rolling. Let's get some candid shots of King interacting with his people and with his band and his singers. So, obviously, that's legit. That's what's happening here. But to zero in on that and the camera, and as we said before, Elvis is well aware he's being filmed, and everybody's aware, and it's not just for a feature film. And the conversation comes to Gee Gee, so I guess it's kind of on Presley because he explains exactly where he is, leaving nothing out. Again, normal conversation questions. Well, why can't he do this? Why can't he do that? And Presley has to explain in detail about their family issues. And again, it's the times, I guess, nowadays with litigation and whatnot, that would never have made it in there. But maybe it's an indication of Elvis as being really candid. Maybe it's an indication, because I said earlier, he knows he's being filmed. So how real, how candid is he really being? Well, here he is seemingly having forgotten. You could say that Elvis must have forgotten he was being filmed because he's talking about somebody's personal life. But maybe not that. I don't think he ever forgot the camera was on him at any time in his life. But maybe it's a good indication that it's just about as real and as raw as we ever see Presley. And it is an interesting conversation because, yeah, it's about somebody's family issues. People are being named and children are not being named, but, referenced. And it's a sticky one. But it's always fascinated me since I was a kid seeing that there's this interesting custody thing going on, and we hear it, and they hear it in the theater.
Yeah, I just wonder, that there was obviously a conscious decision to include that by Denis Sanders when they were doing the edit.
Yeah, you did mention that it was a decision still. You're right. Let's use that conversation. Maybe even he didn't think anything about the personal nature of the conversation. He just thought there's a nice candid moment. Maybe, like, again, the times were different. I did learn that Gee Gee was there. There's a few famous pictures of Elvis and Tom Jones when Tom Jones visited Graceland. And there's a picture up against the beautiful breeze block wall of the carport with Elvis and Tom and a few of the guys. And Gee Gee is in that picture. So points for Gee Gee, even though he got his personal stuff talked about in a major motion picture.
Yeah, and look, it was very complimentary. Obviously, everybody was very sad that he had gone. So he was obviously someone that was enormously well liked. And sadly, in fact, in 2005, he, according to Graceland's, the official Graceland website, was struck by a vehicle while walking to work in Nashville. Succumbed to his injuries at the age of 61. So there's a sad postscript to that particular part of the film.
Yeah, that's a shame. Yeah, I just learned that recently myself. That's a tough way to go.
As you said, everything's starting to converge. Everybody's working very hard, and opening night is looming. The next rehearsals are actually on stage in the showroom. That's quite interesting. They do a great version of Mary in the Morning, and there's a little bit of fun, but some serious work as well. The lads from the Memphis Mafia are sort of perhaps getting in the way. Would that be a bit too harsh?
Well, no and yes. Like, even when I was a kid watching this, something about the way Joe Esposito, would he throw an ice cube or something there, something about the horseplay, I thought to myself, do you not know who this is? Do you not know the majesty of the film he's making? And, of course, they didn't know that about the film. And the guy, I had to remember, this is what they did all the time. I mean, you read any book you read, the lads got up to it. They got up to all kinds of shenanigans. And that was Elvis, almost as much a part of Elvis's makeup as the singing was, the horseplay and the goofing around. So it's no surprise that they're goofing around. But something about that scene always rubbed me a bit of the wrong way. Like, I wanted to yell at the guys, leave them alone, or is this the time? It was an interesting scene. You're right, and maybe it is a bit at the wrong time for them to be horsing around. Because
the band, they've got the orchestra. Everybody is there. Everybody is working very hard. They're focused. They're concentrating. They're trying to get it right. And in as much as Joe Esposito was, an essential part of the entourage and did great work liaising with, Colonel Parker and his road manager. So he was absolutely critical to the operation. But you just sort of wonder, if you're one of the musicians there and you're trying to keep things professional and working, you just sort of wonder if you might have thought, oh, come on, guys, please, we're trying to work here.
And I always thought about the one, too, where I guess one of the Mafia prompts James to start playing.
Yes, that's right.
And King takes umbrage and he says, James, the way he talks to James too is telling, because, like, I run this band. They don't tell you when to start and scream an eagle and all that. So that was interesting too, because you could tell that Presley was jokey, but still a bit ticked. Yeah, like don't get in the way of me and my band right now.
Yeah, we're working. Very quietly spoken, but obviously a man that you don't mess with, and that is Alex Shoofey, who was the hotel president. He passed away in 2007. Now, he said something interesting here, and once again, this is alluded to in Jerry Hopkins' article. The fact that they squeezed 4,100 people into the 2,000 or 2,100 seat showroom. And Jerry Hopkins in his article alludes to the fact that the fire wardens would be getting very upset about tables and blockages in exits and things like that. But funnily enough, the objections seemed to melt away when they were given front row tickets. So there was... But even Alex Shoofey, when he's talking about this, we put 4,100 people in, he's sort of got a bit of a sheepish smile when he says that, I thought.
Yeah. Like he's almost apologizing. And, the good old days when safety was, well, if we can manage safety, fine. But otherwise, get the tables in and, jam them in because Presley's in town. Jam them in. Yeah, get him in there.
He began as a 50... In fact, I think a bit of a classic Hollywood American dream story. He was driving to California to try and find work after the war. His car broke down in Las Vegas. He picked up a $50 a week job as a bookkeeper, ended up running... the International Hotel, having run the Flamingo as well previously, and was known as a really top hotel manager. In fact, here it is. This is from his obituary in the Las Vegas Sun. When Shoofey took over as president of the Flamingo in 1967, it was $25 million in the red. The next year, the resort showed a $15 million profit. And it was Shoofey that had recognised Elvis's value to the hotel virtually from the very first moment, and probably one of the few times where the Colonel was being pressured rather than putting the pressure on. Alex Shoofey had said to the Colonel, look, let's tie up some proper contracts here. This is going to be huge. Colonel Parker apparently said, no, look, let's just wait to see how he goes. This was in 1969, the first engagement, but Alex Shoofey prevailed and the contract was signed, and he became an enormous asset for the hotel, right up until 1976.
Again, there's another fascinating player. Las Vegas history. I think I first stumbled on him when I saw a picture of Presley backstage at the International with Shoofey, and you see Colonel Tom in the background with one of those lab coats with Elvis at the International plastered all over it. Anyways. But Shoofey's wife, Joan, is next to him, and I remember being struck by this woman, and I thought, who is she? And I put it out there on one of the social medias, and, people know Alex Shoofey. People who are Las Vegas historians, they know him. That's a major player, and I like to think that when Colonel went up against a guy like Shoofey, Elvis and Colonel are driving this big bus as well, but Shoofey and Las Vegas and the International, they weren't going to be snowed by the Colonel. So Shoofey's an interesting guy too, a major player for sure. Now, put his name up there. Why wouldn't Sanders have just said Alex Shoofey? Who is this person?
So just from his obituary, Alexander James Shoofey rose from humble beginnings in a Brooklyn orphanage to become a Las Vegas gaming giant, successively running the Sahara, the Flamingo, and the International Hotel. And I gather he actually retired either around the time or very shortly after the hotel was sold to the Hilton in 1972, and then really withdrew from public life effectively. He came back to do an oral history project many years later when he related the story about how the contract with Elvis and Colonel Parker was signed. But apart from that, basically just lived quietly and passed away at 91. There's something, it must be about the desert air. A lot of these Las Vegas Titans do live to a ripe old age, don't they?
They sure do. 91, not bad. And he wasn't working up until then. He was relaxing and enjoying. It says here 60 years he lived in Las Vegas. It's got to be... There's a guy whose story, we should look into this guy because that's fascinating. And that's a major player, a Brooklyn orphanage. And look where he ends up. Unreal.
We're getting to nitty-gritty time. Elvis is, the rehearsals are continuing. In the meantime, the people are trying to work out where to fit all these big corporate parties and how many, how they can fit people in. And it looks like an awful lot of work. And of course, we see it happening once, but 2 shows a night for a month, 3 shows a night, a couple of times towards the end of the engagement. Like, just the amount of work, the logistics of it all is just mind-boggling, isn't it?
Fascinating. It was really fascinating. I really thought about it this time, because I think at one time the guy mentions the Ford Corporation, does he not? Where are they? Yeah, where are they going to sit? And it matters because of the relationship between these corporations and Las Vegas. The free stuff will give you the seating, but where do we seat you? Is he going to be okay with that seat? And it's funny, years down the road, you hear a lot of the shows that have been released since then, and Elvis a couple times mentions from the stage, I hear there's people from the Ford Corporation here or something tonight, so give him a hand, whatever. And he jokes that he expects a new Lincoln to be outside of his hotel room in the morning. Yeah. So you can tie that in with these guys hovering over the seating chart. And yeah, like you say, twice a night, who's coming, who's going to sit where. A lot of hard work. Okay, so we're getting to the show now. There's I assume he's the greeter for the VIP guest, Gene Bone. Couldn't find anything about him anywhere. When I Googled Gene Bone, I came up a whole list of medical related stuff. But, there's some interesting people there that are coming. We see Cary Grant, of course, Sammy Davis Jr., Juliet Prowse, Xavier Cougar, and Charo. Anyone that you were particularly interested in who was turning up? Well, I love it that when I interact with the classic movie crowd on Twitter, they're Cary Grant, Kate Hepburn, Clark Gable heavy. And I always like to say, there is a couple of your favorite actors that understood Presley and liked him. The Cary Grant thing is fascinating. Cary Grant is shown, you see him a couple times in this movie, but there's wonderful footage of the after show party when Cary Grant comes into where they're having the party, and he and Elvis talk. I mean, not for a long time, but they talk in a way
that's right.
And you're looking at Elvis Presley and Cary Grant. And maybe it's a moment where they don't have to be Elvis and Cary. They can just be, I enjoyed your show, and they talk, and it's fascinating. And the Sammy Davis I love too, because you can find pictures all through Elvis's career of him talking to Sammy. So Sammy, who I think could talk to fence post, he had no problem being friends with people, but he's there with Elvis too, and he's enjoying the show. And Juliet Prowse as well is interesting because, as we know, they kind of dated during GI Blues. So people are, returning, and it's a Vegas thing, and Elvis is there. Dale Robertson, cowboy actor that when I was a kid, I didn't know who he was at all. But he comes in briefly as well, and you see him at the after party, and he's really kind of passively introducing his wife to Elvis, almost really kind of reverent. It's really fascinating. So the stars, and again, a great brochure thing for Elvis. Look at the people. You could be in the same showroom, not only with Elvis, but Cary Grant. Oh, look at there's Sammy Davis. So brilliant of Sanders to have put that in, to show how we roll here in the desert.
Okay, so we see Elvis is obviously just getting very close to showtime now. He's very nervous. Quite a nice moment there. Shows a very human side. We see the performance aspects. There's a sequence of songs from probably, I think, the first 4 or 5 shows, I think, they shot. Do you have a particular musical highlight or anything that stands out for you in terms of the performance?
The performance itself, again, when I was a kid, first watching this movie, enamored of his hair in King Creole, for example, to see him so disheveled so early in the show. Even, Aloha from Hawaii, the hair is perfect and it stays that way the whole time. So, but you know what? That tells me he is working it, and this is what happens when I get down to business. There's a couple of, he's rehearsing Bridge Over Troubled Water and Polk Salad Annie, and those performances on stage and on the records, they are 2 standouts for me. It's funny, Bridge Over Troubled Water is so notable as a Simon and Garfunkel song, and it's fascinating that it was Art Garfunkel with his slight sort of gentle voice that sang on their legendary recording. Presley's, I don't know, his performance, see, he gets into a song, finds the things about it that he can relate to and blows them up, and he makes it his own, is again understating it so much. Bridge Over Troubled Water is a fantastic performance by him. Polk Salad Annie, of course, is a juggernaut. I mean, almost any recording on stage of him doing that is just stunning. I'm a big fan of the songs from the record that came out, so I'm not sure of the sequence exactly. Maybe we could go through a bit of the show.
All right, so obviously they start off with "That's All Right," and as you say, I mean, it just before and just as Elvis comes on stage, he really is looking fantastic. Yes. It's just a really great moment there. I've Lost You, that's a great rendition of that one as well. Patch It Up, I think Patch It Up, and I don't know that was, I don't think I've really heard that later, maybe once or twice, but that was a real showstopper, and that is just a joyous thing. They're just having so much fun, and Ronnie Tutter's just great drumming. Jerry Sheff's bass in Patch It Up is really quite incredible. And then we have our old friend from RCA, Lionel Hudson, having such a great time.
Looking great too with his little scarf on. I love it.
Yeah, that's a joyous moment. He does Sweet Caroline, Bridge Over Troubled Water, a medley of some of the earlier hits. Interesting how Suspicious Minds evolved from the recorded version, which had been a number one actually quite recently before the film, how that was changed live to be a real fast-paced, real showstopper. I think that I personally think the live version of Suspicious Mind was really just so much better than the recorded one, quite honestly.
The Suspicious Minds podcast, the series of podcasts about the one song we could do. I grew up with Aloha from Hawaii, so think about the songs he does there. That's the first versions I heard of almost every one of those recordings. And the Suspicious Minds in Aloha from Hawaii is, well, it's indicative of how he did it on stage in the 70s. It is, yes, it's much faster pace. Right off the bat, the tempo is faster. And it's a showpiece. It's the bridge, he breaks it down, jokes about his clothes ripping and whatnot. And it's a really, I mean, there's one version, I think, from this era, 70, that is on one of the latest box sets that came out that is like 9 minutes long. It's magnificent to hear it, to think about being in the room and to seeing him perform that. It's funny, though. You record the song in such a way, you obviously have a strong feeling for it. I mean, you can buy the box sets and hear the alternate takes, the rehearsals of that. We work hard on it. We get it to where we want it. It's a magnificent song. It's quite often considered his best recording ever. And then when you present it live, you kind of change it. You make it a little bit of a different animal. Now, right off the bat, you can say, well, perhaps if you did it note by note from the recording, it doesn't quite work in a live setting. I understand that. But the changes are good ones, and it's still a magnificent recording, but you're right, it is quite different. But in defense of the original recording, when I was setting up writing articles about the best Elvis Presley songs ever and really trying to figure out, because it's a hard job, all of his recordings, all of his really good recordings, and trying to reappreciate Suspicious Minds, the studio version, if you really get the headphones on and really listen, like it is magnificent in defense of the studio version. The live one's a different animal, but it is quite something, and it was really what you'd call a showstopper, I guess.
There's also a little diversion there where the International Fan Club representative, Elvis, presents him with the tandem bicycle that he and Joe had ridden around the MGM lot. That goes to Luxembourg to a fan convention, which all looks very sensible and reasonable. And once again, we come back to what was the motivation behind what is going to be shown, and then we get to the Elvis impersonators in Luxembourg, and it sort of gets a little bit weird.
It gets, it gets very weird. My first thought, let's get this out of the way, was the pacing. Where this shows up in the film was odd. Like, I don't know where you would put it. But once we get to the stage, I'm thinking concert film, let's roll. The only thing I'll say about that is again, fascinating about how popular he was overseas, and, never having appeared over there seemed to only make him bigger because he was this mythical American figure who we never got to see. And, this is the bike that he's on. That's a fascinating little part too. the last guy they show, I think, in the jean jacket looks a bit like Elvis Costello after a rough night at the pubs or whatever. He's not even, I don't know if you call it singing, but he's doing something. But I had to give him some props afterwards because he's tapping into the primal thing that Elvis has. Like, you know, he's not this Vegas Elvis who is singing to Cary Grant and his buds, but he's got the primal thing going, and that's okay from a certain, you know, I don't want to hear the whole song the guy sings. Give me the snippet and get me out. But it shows you the spectrum, and it shows you also that as early as 1970, this tribute artist thing had already sprung up. So that's a fascinating diversion. Funny where he put it in the film.
To look at the film as a whole in the context of the time, and perhaps with looking back with a benefit of hindsight, how do you see it as a whole? Do you think, given that we now know what Denis Sanders was trying to achieve, do you think he achieved what he wanted to? He was very confident about it. He told, as I think I alluded to earlier, he told Jerry Hopkins, 1, it's going to make an absolute fortune, and 2, it's going to change documentaries stylistically. So Denis certainly wasn't hesitant in talking it up.
Which makes perfect sense to me. I mean, would have been devastating for a lot of people for Denis to have said, you know what, didn't quite get it, this is going to be... You might as well go the other way and say, look out, because Hollywood's about to change with my film. I can see him saying that. It confirms that, you know, he thought that he nailed it. He got the whole sociological thing, all the different fans. It is of its time. It's definitely 1970. My neighbor, bless her, said, I've got this Elvis movie here I don't want. So, of course, I went over there, and she handed me That's the Way It Is, but it was the special edition from 2001, I think. I watched it, and I was almost heartbroken because it was different from the 1970, obviously. Little nuances, little scenes weren't there, and I was sad. Of course, I've come to really appreciate that version now. I think it's excellent, but it shows you that here's a great moment in Elvis's career and life. Unfortunately, the way it was made, very 1970. Audiences today might not grasp the majesty of the man at the time with this document. So we'll take that footage and we'll present it in a way that audiences can understand, and you will see what we're trying to say about this man at this point. About Sanders, I have to say, and this is the one difference from the 01 version that hurt me in my soul, but when he finishes Can't Help Falling in Love, Sanders decides to shoot it from way behind the orchestra. You see in the immediate foreground the band, the orchestra. You see Elvis gesturing with his arms in the air. The curtain begins to come down, and the people begin to stand up. And I'm telling you, I'm actually fighting it back a little bit now. It is emotional because it is a great depiction of a triumph. And I always add in what we all know about Elvis's life and his career, the kind of inherent sadness in the story. And to see him at such a conquering moment with his arms in the air and the timing of all of that with the curtain coming down, it is a magnificent... I don't even know if Sanders understood. Perhaps he couldn't have because of the aura of the Elvis of the next 7 years and the next 50. But his boys converge on him when the curtain is down, the show is over. That big towel goes around his neck. And when he gestures back at the camera, there is something emotional about it, George. There's something there, like you were with me from the beginning. Good morning, Hollywood camera. And from there, I have conquered the world. You've been there with me. How about that? Not too bad, eh? He's gesturing. How was that? Okay, with the okay symbol. And I'm telling you, it's emotional.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a really... Yeah, I agree. I actually think it's a much better film than I always thought it was. For me, it was almost a bit of a, I don't know, but not for want of a better expression, a bit of a poor relation to Elvis on tour. And I've sort of actually looked at it probably very differently this time and probably appreciate it a lot more than I have previously.
I agree. Those of us that have been to Las Vegas in the last 20 or 30 years and looked around and saw, what it has become, wonderful in its own way still, but certainly not the Las Vegas of mid-century that we love so much. If for nothing else, it's a great window into, Las Vegas in the summer at a big moment when a big player was in town. And, I find I always end up watching it in August around the anniversary of his death. It's part of my little summer festival. And it ties in the thing with Las Vegas, heat, the desert, the way the city worked in terms of entertainment, and Elvis. So you talk Elvis on tour, perhaps more of a straightforward concert film, aside from some of the older clips they use, but a lot of it is just more performance in different venues. This gives you that Las Vegas thing. And it gives you, some of the shots, the signs being put up and the show being put on in Las Vegas. So with this film, you not only get Presley in his prime, and I've come to accept that that's the way it is. It's my favorite Elvis Presley album. And 69 to 70 is the pinnacle for me. So you get him in his prime, singing wonderful songs, and you get the Las Vegas thing that we all like too. So yeah, and when you look at it for a podcast like this, and you dig into certain little aspects, it does punch things up, and it makes you really appreciate it more. And yeah, I think I like it even more now than I ever did, if that's possible. I didn't think it was, but
now it's probably not surprising. Colonel Parker wasn't 100% happy with the final result. One of his objections was the fact that they had focused on some of the catering at the hotel, the big sides of meat, the opulence of the surroundings. He was concerned that people in some of the less affluent cities that might have come to see the film perhaps had to make some sacrifices that week, that they might feel a bit alienated by the opulence. Colonel Parker apparently was also unhappy about the fact that they were sort of virtually discussing a league table of who was the biggest attractions, whether it was Streisand or Sinatra or Elvis. Parker always thought, everybody, there's room for everybody. Everybody can just basically work in their own universe, and it's not a competition. The issue of the fact that he's concerned about alienating some of the less affluent fans, I think that's something that appeals to me. And I know his faults have been well documented, and we know that, he was far from perfect, but there are a few little things about the old Colonel that, I think are to be admired.
Yeah, that's very Colonel, him having that issue. Keep it simple. Elvis is a simple, humble guy. Keep it simple. And I understand him bringing that up, but it's almost pointless too, because Las Vegas is about opulence anyways. And, Joe Blow, who lives out in the sticks, what is he when he's sitting there thinking in his bedroom watching Carson late at night? He's thinking Vegas. He's thinking that's the pinnacle. And then he goes to his local movie house and sees Presley there in Vegas, and he sees the opulence. I mean, it just would have drove tourism. I think it's a confirmation. See, I was right. Vegas. Look at that. I got to get there. I got to go there because look at that hunk of meat. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Colonel always had his own way, and to bring that up makes sense for me, knowing what I know about Colonel. But to me, that was just more a diamond, a glistening thing, a reason to go there.
The film was actually released in November. Was that a particularly fast turnaround? Because they didn't really finish principal photography until September for that first stadium show. I mean, obviously they would have perhaps been editing and getting things together, but from summer to virtually Thanksgiving seems to be a very quick turnaround to get the film actually in theatres.
Seemed pretty fast to me too, but I think great. This is what's happening now. Get it out there. I mean, I guess it was winter by that point, and, people are in the theater seeing it over the holidays, whatever, and maybe it gives them 6 months to save up for the next Vegas season, the next summer, or for the next time Elvis was going to be there. Wow, good for them in a couple of months. They edited the footage together. They had all the raw footage, and then it's up to the editor that we spoke about. Get it together and get it out. So good for them. It was a document of what's happening then, so that was timely. I think it's great.
So number 22 at the box office didn't seem like. I mean, it got some very nice reviews. I don't think there was too much negativity. A newspaper in Chicago essentially called it a commercial for future Las Vegas engagements, which probably would have made Colonel Parker very happy and was obviously the idea.
Yes.
And the Village Voice that said that very hurtful thing about one of our favourite interviewees was quite complimentary as well. So it's interesting too. Earlier, I just alluded to this article by Jerry Hopkins from September the 17th, 1970 in Rolling Stone. Now, Jerry Hopkins was an Elvis biographer. He wrote Elvis in 1971 and Elvis the Final Years in 1981. Had also written some other stuff on Elvis and music generally. Nicholas Naff, who we also met in the film, the director of publicity, said something very interesting about Elvis's effect on Las Vegas and the hotel. He said, Elvis changes the entire metabolism of the hotel, and he's singularly significant in one regard. There is constant occupancy. For Tom Jones, they fly in, they fly out. Elvis has such a following, so many fans. For him, they fly in, check in, and stay for the month.
Wow, that's and I mean, these guys have no reason to make this up. I mean, they've seen all the stars come and go. So for him to say that, that's fascinating. So people, again, we're talking about Joe Blow, who is a regular simple Joe. He has saved up. I mean, if he's staying in Las Vegas for any length of time. So fascinating that he would say that, because you can always compare the artists, and Sinatra is Sinatra, and guys of his ilk. Tom Jones was huge in the desert at the time. So for him to say that, I hadn't heard that. That's fascinating.
Another interesting thing here in Jerry Hopkins' article, that in the February engagement of 1970, the maitre d' and the showroom waiters split $300,000 in tips for the month.
There's the influx of capital and what a performer, does to a whole town. I mean, even the guys, bussing tables. They love it when the man comes to town, because that's amazing. That's big money back then.
Just one more thing from this article. Apparently the Colonel gave Denis Sanders the last-minute instructions, which were, now don't go winning an Oscar for this picture because we don't have any tuxedos to wear to the celebration.
Again, vintage Colonel. Gosh, I'd have to get a robe made with Oscar night blasted all over it or something ridiculous.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, boy.
Gary, one of the things we talked about on Elvis, That's the Way It Is, was the fact that Colonel Parker was unhappy with certain aspects of the rough cut, and he actually articulated those objections in a lengthy memo, interestingly not to Herbert Solow, the producer, but to James Aubrey, the corporate head of MGM. What I'd like your opinion on, Gary, if I may, is the fact that, and I'm referring to Peter Guralnick's Careless Love, the biography that we both think very highly of. And Peter Guralnick goes through some of Colonel's objections that he wrote in this memo, some of which we covered in our last episode. But this is Peter Guralnick's take on it. He says, most of all, without ever actually naming it, what the Colonel really seems to be objecting to is the director's implicit contempt for his subject. So do you think that's, I know we talked about Denis Sanders' motivation, some of his editorial choices. Do you think Peter Guralnick's observation about this contempt is fair?
Well, I didn't see that at all. I hate to go against Peter Guralnick. I'm willing to admit that he knows a little bit more than I do about the situation. I was trying to, after you mentioned this to me, look at things again to see if I could see what was going on there, and I just couldn't. The only thing I can think of is that with all of the Elvis things that have happened, particularly since his death, all of the takes on Elvis and all of the, the cultural opinions about him, perhaps he went back almost in a revisionist sort of way and looked again at the things depicted in the movie and thought, well, maybe that could be depicted better or shown better, or I can get this from that scene, or I can put this spin on it. But it's funny, that's the way it is, as you and I spent a lot of time nailing down, it's just a wonderfully magnificent document of this certain time in Elvis's life. And to hear that there was issues with the depictions, no, to answer your question, I didn't see that at all in the film.
In fact, Colonel Parker was quite complimentary. In his memo to James Aubrey, Parker was actually quite complimentary. He said this, Mr. Denis Sanders did a tremendous job with great enthusiasm and dedication. We are endeavouring to help put it together on a professional, commercial basis. Now, he's obviously very cosy with James Aubrey because there's a very nice little personal bit here. Jim, as you know, Elvis, you and I believed in this idea from the start. I tried to sell the idea for the past 10 years, but no one would or could see it. We are all grateful for your belief in it. So this is interesting in that James Aubrey was obviously a key part of putting it all together.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's no surprise really that Colonel would have gone right to the top to make this happen. Yes. So that makes sense to me. He likes to rub elbows and to do a bit of battle with people like this. So here's something that worked out really well. So it would be an after the fact commiserating of, gosh, look at us, didn't we do great? Elvis was good too, but man, we really put it together, and so that makes perfect Colonel sense.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, here we go. The anticlimax of a director's ending tacked on to follow the climax of Elvis's stage show. The frequent cut-ins on Elvis's performance with great disadvantage to getting across seeing Elvis as he really is performing. But obviously something that he did succeed in getting removed was some disparaging references to Blue Hawaii and GI Blues. I believe the slurs on Blue Hawaii and GI Blues should be completely removed, as these were two of the most successful films ever made by Elvis. They did not deserve to be mentioned just as trash in such a way. All interview footage ought to be thoroughly checked so that it doesn't become monotonous and take away from the performance. As these are Guralnick's words, the smarmy dismissal of Las Vegas itself for the kind of conspicuous consumption that could only alienate Elvis's true fans. There's no reason to show an abundance of steaks in a truck in this picture when perhaps in Dalton, Georgia, where the picture may be showing, a family saved up money to see the picture and relinquished their hamburger for that night so they could see Elvis. So how do you see how the Colonel was sort of thinking about the film or framing his objections?
I alluded to it earlier. It's hard maybe to criticize the Colonel in his business dealings. The man had an eye to a buck for sure. Interesting that you note that Colonel doesn't want you to talk ill of Blue Hawaii and GI Blues. Because they were big money makers, Colonel says you shouldn't talk bad about them. But perhaps what was happening was somebody was making a comparison. Look at the family-friendly, safe, easy, singing to babies type character he was in these early films. Now we have him here in Las Vegas and he's dynamic and that's a legitimate point. That's a point I think we all have tried to make in the past. So, but it's Colonel who, now don't disparage those films because they made money. It would never occur to him, well, he wasn't depicted as cool as he could have been in those films or whatever. It's funny, those two films are two of my favorites, but I can understand from a critical standpoint you wanting to make a comparison. Interesting that he talks about the steaks and the poor couple who can't have a hamburger that night. That is so Colonel, so Carnival Barker, who knows, how people spend their money and the entertainment they want. But at the same time, I would think the Las Vegas people would want to show Las Vegas in all its opulence to help to drive tourism. Perhaps Colonel has got a foot in reality and says, you can do that all you want, people are not going to be able to afford a trip to Las Vegas. But then the back and forth is, well, shouldn't we depict every moment of an experience in Las Vegas? Because this is all the people are going to get. The same with the performances on stage. You could argue, put the camera on a tripod, aim it at Elvis and let him go. This is a wonderful film document. To cut in with interviews, yeah, it's always one of the things that rankled me about that film that I love. That's the way it is. The people interviewed in the middle of a performance, plus it's not like they're so compelling and, they add so much. And did you hear the way James Burton hit that riff? Like, they're not adding much to it. They're talking about their own lives or whatever. They're talking about things that I can't remember at all, but I remember Elvis singing, "You've Lost That Love and Feeling." So interesting complaints that make sense, but don't, and you can go back and forth forever. But, leave it to Colonel to pick out all those things and to want to fight for, not the art part, but, the buck and how this film should be presented. It's not surprising to hear any of that. And like I say, you could debate back and forth for days on those things.
Yeah, exactly. Peter Guralnick's take on the film itself is quite interesting. Viewed today, it remains in many ways a reflection of its time with split green gimmickry, a jumble of action images, and the muddled approach, not sure if this is entirely fair, and the muddled approach to rock and roll that one might expect of a serious filmmaker down on his luck.
Yeah, I know. I've struggled with this. I don't I guess it's so hard to analyze something with our current brains. Looking back, it's hard to analyze. Guralnick is the guy that can do it. But, I don't know. For years, all I've seen is great, amazing rehearsal footage, great concert footage, good behind-the-scenes stuff. To me, it's a wonderful document. It done the only way he knew how to do it at the time.
When we were talking about Elvis, That's the Way It Is in our earlier podcasts, we were talking about some of the eccentricities and some of the fan interviews, and something that struck me when I watched Elvis on tour again, just preparing for this, the difference in the way that the fans were represented in Elvis on tour versus Elvis, That's the Way It Is. It struck me that in Elvis on tour, when they're talking to the fans at the concert, the camera is on the arena floor and there's a group of fans around, and it's sort of a conversation. They're on the same level as the fans. They're saying, we travelled all this way, we sing Elvis songs in our spare time, we've got all this memorabilia, and it's virtually a conversation. And when they're at the airport with the fans and at the hotels, the camera is there with the fans, and it's sort of almost we are part of this, rather than in That's the Way It Is, where it was almost like, we are examining you from an outsider's perspective. Is that a fair observation, do you think?
I think so. Elvis on tour, a fan's eye view, an interesting technique of just, having the camera in amongst the people. And, we're just shooting the breeze about Elvis. We just happen to be filming it, and it's going to be part of a film. So in amongst the people, you're right. Whereas That's the Way It Is does seem more of a dissertation. We're writing a paper on Elvis, and that requires talking to some people. So we'll dissect them in a way, and we'll film that, and we'll get the skinny from them in that way. Whereas Elvis on tour perhaps is funner, more loose, and just the camera is one of the fellas maybe, and it's a little bit more grassroots and homey feeling, which ties in with Elvis on tour, the non-performance parts, the backstage, the running through the corridors, the inside the limos. It's more like you're hanging out, with Elvis. So it does have an appeal, Elvis on tour, because of some great performance footage, yes, but there's that real, as much a behind the scenes thing as we ever got of Elvis Presley. Maybe you get it in Elvis on tour.
This was in 1950. This was investigating organised crime generally. Possibly the one city that the Kefauver Committee could have taken apart from top to bottom out of an 11,000-page report. When the committee finally finished after hearings in 14 cities, only 4 pages were devoted to Las Vegas. And part of the reason for that was when they turned up for their one day of hearings, all their witnesses were conveniently out of town. So according to an article in PBS, which we'll link to on the PBS website, they turned up, interviewed a very small number of witnesses, went sightseeing at the Hoover Dam, gave a press conference, and then left. And that was the Kefauver Committee in Las Vegas. So, but of course, by the 1960s, we mentioned Howard Hughes. He bought the Desert Inn from Mo Dalitz, and that paved the way essentially for the corporatisation of many of the entertainment venues, and lots of money from outside investors came in. Kirk Kerkorian was another one. He, of course, owned the International Hotel, where Elvis reignited his live performance career in 1969. And he also owned MGM, which is interesting. After a huge number of complex manoeuvres involving Ted Turner and United Artists and back and forth, Kirk Kerkorian basically ended up with the MGM logo. And of course, that now is used on the MGM Grand, which looks absolutely spectacular from the images that you can see online. And it also brought in, I guess it ushered in the era of the professional hotel manager. And Alex Shoofey is someone we have discussed previously, who was the inaugural president of the International Hotel. Now, no more skimming off the top and money finding its way back to friends in Cleveland and New York. I mean, this brought in a real accountability and business. Every part of the hotel had to make profit. In fact, Alex Shoofey ran the Flamingo in the late 60s and within 12 months had turned a $25 million deficit into a $15 million profit. It seems by the 60s that some of the sort of the mob-run places were sort of running out of steam.
You know, we could get into the weeds, really, with the organized crime. These guys were uneducated. They were of the streets. One of the few things they really knew how to do well was to make a dollar. They made no bones about it kind of being about suckers too, about degenerate gambler types who, if you cool the room down and put a game in front of them, well, we're going to make $1 million. Business-wise, aside from a few examples we could name, you know, maybe they weren't the smartest in terms of business acumen, but there was the Lucky Lucianos around who understood such things, and they were able to get it off the ground almost as if they were showing what could be done here. On a small scale, we've built the Flamingo and we've taken over other hotels like this. You see what we can do here. And the criminality, I guess, was more obvious because people knew, whether they knew or not, wink, wink, who owned these hotels and who were front men and all that. And then when government got involved, law enforcement got involved, and it led to the corporations, it was almost as if, you know, the corporations had this cloak of respectability and they said, you know, we'll take over because we can do this, we can do that. It's almost a little bit like Lisa Marie selling a part of the estate to a big company who can do things, who have the means to do things and have the infrastructure and have the matrices set up to do these things. So maybe the mobsters couldn't do that. They did, of course, better than anybody could have expected. But the corporations took over and took it through the roof. Now, the cynical among us would draw comparisons and say, you know, these big corporations and all of corporate America are no better than thieves as well. They entice you in with the same things the mob did. Think about it. And like you talk about, it's felonies to not pay off, and it's very regulated, very restricted. People become wealthy, let's face it, whether it's from inscrutable means or not, whether there's honesty or not. I don't think everybody's corrupt, but certainly the promise of dollars would have turned many a councilman's head. It's different, but it's not quite so different. But because of the money these corporations had, then they were able to take it through the roof. But again, like Marty's film Casino, that image of the masses coming in to gamble and they're wearing tracksuits and whatnot. The difference between it was a night out, you know, you dressed up, there was a classy thing to it. Now it's certainly different. It's a more of a theme park experience, and it's less menacing, but it lacks a little something too, being that it's been corporatized or whatever you want to call it. But there's also, it's funny, the comparisons as well, because it's still about making money almost no matter what, and above all.
It's interesting just looking back to Elvis's effect on the city, not just the International Hotel and the Hilton, but when he was in town for an engagement, it was particularly good for many of the lower paid workers, because people that were seasonal or in casual work would be earning consistently when Elvis is in town. And we just, now we discussed this in one of our earlier podcasts, but it's just worth perhaps reminding ourselves of this quote. This was from Nicholas Naff, who was the publicity director at the International Hotel, who was actually quoted in the movie Elvis, That's the Way It Is, and also gave an interview with Jerry Hopkins in Rolling Stone magazine in 1970.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, Elvis changes the entire metabolism of the hotel, and he is significant in one regard. There is a constant occupancy. For Tom Jones, they fly in, see the show, and fly out. Elvis has such a following, so many fans, they fly in, check in, and stay the month. And Alex Shoofey, being interviewed, also said that he had a unique global reach for an Elvis engagement. People would fly in from all over the world.
Yeah, you know, one of my top 25 favorite movies is the original Ocean's 11. I highly recommend the Blu-ray. Like American Graffiti, there's a documentary and a commentary track with Frank Sinatra Jr. that is just as fascinating as the film itself. And one of the things on the Ocean's 11 Blu-ray, the home video release, is a small documentary, and they talk about the fact that when when Frank and Dean or Frank or Dean or Sammy were in town, there was a different buzz. So Las Vegas became the late 50s, early 60s. It was the destination. The Summit was appearing at the Sands. The Rat Pack was doing their thing. It was huge. And then, as you talked about, 1966, later in the 60s, that kind of changed. And it might even had we didn't live at that time. There might have been a pervading sense that the rep of the city was changing. It was maybe lesser. It was different. The 60s themselves were making everything different. But I also read an article recently from a Las Vegas magazine when Elvis Presley established himself back in 69 in the International. It returned the city to that place where there was shows, there was entertainment. So it was almost like there was the Sinatra and Friends peak, then there was a bit of a valley, and who knows where that could have led to. But then Presley shows up, the whole town is affected, the whole hotel, the whole economy. And same thing with the Ocean's 11 dock. Somebody said that, the bellboys, the guys that worked in the restaurant, the dishwashers, everybody benefited because of the influx of visitors. Las Vegas had another peak because of Presley in 69, and like you say, all through the 70s, where it became a thing. People are planning their holidays and vacations. Is Presley going to be in Las Vegas at that time? They might plan accordingly. And other people benefited as well. It's funny, if you follow Vintage Las Vegas on Twitter, which I highly recommend, they always are sharing pictures of the city from elevated views or whatever, and you see the marquees, the people that played there. Everybody, it became like a second act to many singers' careers. It reinvented in 69. Tom Jones, of course, Wayne Newton, we spoke about, Barbra Streisand. It became the place to go again because of, like you say, Presley changed the whole dynamic in the city. And that had lingering effects all through the 70s.
It's interesting what you just said about perhaps the later part of a performer's career. There's a British Australian writer and commentator named Clive James, now sadly no longer with us. Back in the 90s, he did an incredible documentary series called Fame in the 20th Century. He had a particular phrase about Las Vegas. He called it the elephant's graveyard, where aging entertainers go to sell off their own ivory before crashing to their knees for the last time.
Well, you know what? Yes. A couple of years ago when Tom Jones's autobiography came out, what an eye-opener it was for me. He was unapologetic, but at the same time he said they were offering you boatloads of money, and you set up shop and you stayed there. I remember being so sad. Andy Williams, late in his career, I guess he was 70-odd years old, but I wished he would come to my backyard. But when he sets up shop in Branson and you go to see him, I'm thinking to myself, I can't blame the guy. How smart is that? So by the same token, Tom Jones said in his book, they offered me boatloads of money. I didn't spend a dime. Everything was free. I just stayed there, and that was my home base. Then he goes on and it gets very interesting. He says, I stayed too long. I was too seduced by that. I became a caricature, and my whole reputation was changed. And I only had myself to blame, but he talks about how he crawled out of that. I never scoff. We have a casino just north of us here in southern Ontario that I've been there many times. Engelbert Humperdinck, I saw Anne Margaret there, Neil Sedaka. That's part of the thing when people get to that point in their careers. And I don't scoff at that because there's still people going to see them. They're still making people remember their lives and the history with this artist. So Las Vegas basically created that thing, that second act of a performer's life. And I got no problem with that. It gives the city an identity. It's funny, the people that ended up having to build a show to put on stage because the records aren't selling or my TV show is off the air. And you could maybe snicker at that. Now they're reduced to Vegas. But I don't look at it that way. I look at it as they're continuing to entertain. If the people are still showing up there, then what's the problem? So it's a fascinating maybe I'm starting another podcast about the second act. I call it the victory lap of a person's career. So Vegas invented that for sure.
I don't think anyone expects someone at 80 to still be as great as they were at 25. But it's more about the experience of actually, Peter Guralnick actually mentioned this in his Elvis biography, Careless Love, and said, by sort of 76, 77, it was more about the audience wanting to come and spend an hour with Elvis, good, bad, or indifferent.
You know what? You're making me think about Elvis. Okay, it was 76. the lucid thinking fan is looking at it and hearing it and saying, well, this is different. This is not like it was in 56 or 69. That's unfortunate. But you know what? It's still Elvis. You know what we can say, George? You can say the exact same thing about the city of Las Vegas. Okay? It's no longer hip, cool, the suits with the pocket square. Look at the shine on my shoes. It's no longer about, I wonder who owns this casino. Who's walking through the lobby? Is that whoever, Lucky Luciano? It's not like that anymore, but it's still Las Vegas. It's still worth the trip. It's still the experience you get. Just like Elvis in 76 is Las Vegas nowadays. It's different, but it's still what it is.
I saw a documentary recently on the Bellagio and the fountain, the huge opulent fountain display that they have, which is this engineering marvel. And that was quite fascinating just to see the scope and the vision of this hotel and the facilities and the interiors. And I guess that sort of epitomizes what we've been talking about, the change from, those early days of the Flamingo and the Desert Inn and the Sands and just to what it is now, this incredible, just the amount of money and vision behind this is just mind-boggling.
We always are sad about things being changing and things being different, but that's the way of the world, and things are going to be different. And it's not always a negative. I mean, sure, some things are lost, but the past is the past, and it's past. So, but it's funny, the money and where it sprang from to where it is today, the feats of engineering, never mind, the volcanoes, the roller coasters, just remarkable. So it is, like I say, it's quite a city.
Suggested reading and additional watching and listening. If we've hopefully inspired a little interest in Hollywood and Las Vegas and Elvis around this time, I'll just kick off with a couple of things. If you're interested in Hollywood and what was happening in Hollywood around this time, there's a fantastic book by Peter Biskind called Easy Riders, Raging Bulls. There's also a documentary as well, and that is talking about the changing of the guard. Effectively, you've got Warren Beatty trying to explain to Jack Warner why Bonnie and Clyde is such a great movie, and that is a really fantastic book and documentary, so that is well worth looking at. I alluded to previously Gary's articles on Soul Ride blog about Elvis and movies are absolutely enlightening and brilliant, and we'll put a link up on the newsletter. So, Gary, have you got any suggestions for the people that have been very kind to still be listening to us at this point?
Well, definitely, the film we've been talking about itself, I mean, watch it with different eyes and appreciation for it. The 2001 version is a fascinating companion. I always go back to Peter Guralnick's stunning biographies of Elvis, his two parts, Last Train to Memphis and Careless Love. The interviews he did are staggering. Alana Nash's book with the Memphis Mafia is 900 pages of fascinating interviews and behind-the-scenes stuff. Yes, from a certain perspective, but it's fascinating too. But that's where I always start with Guralnick's books on Elvis. Just about everything that ever happened and every perspective on it can be found there in a good journalistic way, no slants, and very, very interesting. That's where I would start for sure.
Something I'd also like to recommend, BBC World Service do documentary podcasts, and they did one a few years ago called Las Vegas Stripped Bare, and that was a really fascinating radio documentary about Las Vegas past and present. It was hosted by a Las Vegas limo driver named Adele Edelman, who I only just found out sadly passed away a year or so after she made this documentary. But that's on the BBC World Podcasts website, but once again we'll be putting a link to that as well. ElvisConcerts.com, it's a website run by Francesc Lopez, and that has a great database and pretty much anything that you need to know about Elvis on stage in the 70s, concert stats, schedules, jumpsuits worn, attendances, concert reviews, everything is there. Would thoroughly recommend that. Gary, anything else?
No, I think we pretty well covered it. Yeah, there's lots to learn and lots to know, and it only helps you understand an artist or a film better to educate yourself a little bit, and it increases your appreciation of anything. So dig in and learn stuff, I would recommend.
So we'll also link to the full Rolling Stone article, which you can, there's no paywall on that, you can just click on that and read Jerry Hopkins' work there. And I'll also put a link to Cricket Coulter's brief YouTube clip from Elvis Week 2011, where she talks about her relationship with Elvis that was certainly not made apparent through the film. Here we go about and this is Glenn D. Harden was interviewed, and he said the hotel opened July 4th with Barbra Streisand. They couldn't keep it full. With Elvis, it was full. We had him sitting in the aisles, and the fire marshal was saying, look, you've got to get these tables out of the aisles, and they were saying, look, just be quiet, we'll get you a seat in the front next week. So,
hey, the good old days, man.
You can get in touch with us at deck4podcast.com or leave a comment or question on SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, or our social media. Follow Gary Wells at soulrideblog.com, your home for vintage leisure, and Oliver Crocker at devonfirebooks.com, and at the Bill Podcast on Patreon or your preferred platform. Check out some great travel videos and tips from Steve Collins on his YouTube channel, Steve Collins Traveller, formerly Please Tell Me Where to Go. Our original instrumental theme and mellow sounds are thanks to Detlef Wolf and hardworking Gainesville, Europe's top Tom Petty tribute band out of Germany. Find them at gainesville-band.com. We take some external guidance on the fair use of potentially copyrighted material for commentary and critique. Details at our website. The Deck 4 podcast is available under Creative Commons. This has been George Fairbrother. Thank you for listening.